I know how hard it can be to get stuck in that subconscious program autopilot that our brains are designed to make everything easier. That's why we don't have to think about it when we brush our teeth, when we get dressed. These are all kind of unconscious, outside of our awareness, easy to keep up habits, even if they're bad habits like drinking.
You don't have to wait for the seasons to change. So I always say, like, if you didn't quit in the fall, or if you didn't quit in the winter, don't think that you have to go out day drinking in the spring and suffer throughout the summer, being dependent on alcohol, feeling toxic and miserable. You can quit anytime you want. It's all a matter of perception and interpretation.
Thanks for tuning in to the Elevation Recovery Podcast, your hub for addiction recovery strategies, hosted by Chris Scott and Matt Finch.
Welcome to episode 235 of Elevation Recovery. My name is Matt Finch, and Chris, it's good to see you again today, my friend and co-host. You got the beautiful sunny weather in the background in the golf course that you live at. It's been, while you visited here, it was really sunny and beautiful, 80 degrees. We got a lot of sun. But for the past 4 days, it's been totally overcast here. And I've already been noticing, my mood's still good, but I've already been noticing less vitamin D. So I've been supplementing with it. But I can already notice the trees and the sky and everything around is just darker, right? There's not as much brilliant colors. That warmth is gone. It's been a little bit cooler, not like freezing cold, but it's been cooler temperatures, now that we're into fall, and we're moving into a phase where it's going to be getting darker earlier, pretty soon coming up, and it's going to start getting colder and colder, particularly in places in the Midwest, the Northeast, Canada, and all sorts of other places. And so that is when a lot of people will start to drink more, or will start to use more opioids or stuff like that. We'll start to eat more pizza and comfort foods, because the declining total sunlight is, number one, less duration throughout the day, and number two, less potency in the power, and number three, that colder weather can tend to make people want more comfort foods, bundling up in blankets and watching more Netflix and stuff. So what do you think about all that? And good to see you again, man. And Papaya says,
great to
Papaya's
be back.
happy to be here too.
It's always good to be with you and Papaya. I've got the dogs. They're somewhere lazing around here. We went for a couple-mile walk this morning. It has been really nice. And actually, I love this time of year in Savannah because it cools off enough that I don't have to wash my clothes every single time I take the dogs out to pee or just walk outside. So it's still humid, but it's a little bit cooler. And I've been sitting out on my patio, trying to do some work out there and just getting some fresh air. And it's nice. I guess I try to bring the sunny weather with me wherever I go. I definitely don't associate San Diego with being cloudy ever, except for pre 10:30 a.m. when I'd wake up in the hotel and I would see people out on the beach and they're surfing in this mist. But it's kind of like a mysterious, cool mist. And then, of course, it would dissipate and turn into the most beautiful day you'd ever seen. But I believe you that that you do have some overcast days, although you look like you have some pretty good color. But this actually brings me back to before I quit drinking. 2 months before I quit drinking, I was on the beach in Cabo with my girlfriend at the time, drinking all day and all night, and in the airport on the way there and in the airport on the way back. I think one of the last pictures I remember, I actually don't know where this picture is. I wish I could find it. It'd be one of my before pictures, but it was in the airport coming back from that Cabo vacation, I think. And I had this giant beer. I'd ordered a beer at the airport. There was one of those 1 liter beers. It's funny how hammered people are always getting at the airport. I guess if you have a limited imagination and you don't read books, or if you do read books, but you'd rather drink alcohol, or if you're dependent on alcohol, it's just you go there and you get hammered and pass out in your flight. I guess it's an easy thing to do until you get a hangover or withdrawal or toxify your body. And I remember getting those giant tabs. I'd look at my credit card bill, it'd be $184.34 from the airport. I'm like, what the hell? Did I buy a sport coat or something? Nope. I was sitting there drinking beers. And so, of course, after the sunny weather went away, well, after I left Cabo, went back to the Northeast, which is where I lived at the time, the days started getting shorter I had to go back to work. I would have the Sunday scaries, which was apparently a thing. People who aren't necessarily hooked on alcohol refer to the Sunday scaries as a thing where, you don't want to go back to work. You kind of dread Mondays. You've had Friday and Saturday and maybe Sunday brunch, and you've been pumping your body full of alcohol, using that artificial toxin to get artificial euphoria. And then you end up getting a little bit shaky. Your nervous system goes into overdrive. You have a bit of a glutamate rebound. These things that we talk about all the time, these biochemical underlying root causes of the misery of withdrawal or even hangovers for people that aren't addicted. This is something that would have liberated me if I'd understood how I could actually fix that. And of course there are nutritional ways, supplemental ways, lifestyle ways to not deal with that. The best one, by the way, is quitting drinking, which is kind of, why we have a podcast, quitting drinking or drugs. But the Sunday scaries, of course, looped me in. And I remember going back to work and thinking like, I'm not going to make it this time. And I don't know what that meant. I didn't necessarily think I was going to die, but I thought things get pretty bad. And all of a sudden, it's like the exact opposite of being on the beach in Cabo. The sun starts going down, 7 p.m., 6 p.m., 5 p.m. And soon enough, I throw my hands up, and I'm sure I was deficient in vitamin D caused by alcohol flushing nutrients out of my body, but also relatively poor diet compared to today, and not getting enough sun, not ever considering that I might feel weird if I didn't get any sunlight exposure for a week in a row or, 7 days in a row. So things just got bad real fast. And then, of course, that fall was when I ended up in that detox facility and inpatient rehab. And I've seen the same thing happen for a lot of people. There's like a seasonality here. Kudos to whoever quits alcohol. I'm not sure if there's a seasonality for drugs, but opiates or other drugs, I would assume there might be for the same reasons. But kudos to anyone who can quit in the beginning of the summer and stay quit. At least they get to learn how to naturally enjoy their summer, especially if they use nutrient repair. But a lot of people, I'm sorry, I have not quite figured out how to turn off my notifications from my computer. A lot of people will quit in the fall, and it has something to do with the fact that the days are getting shorter. It's getting a little colder. It's no longer day drinking time on the beach, and it's time to, you feel like you have to get your life together. And, of course, then there's the winter. And if the people that didn't quit in the fall then want to quit in the winter, there's always a reason to quit. You don't have to wait for the seasons to change. So I always say, like, if you didn't quit in the fall, or if you didn't quit in the winter, don't think that you have to go out day drinking in the spring and suffer throughout the summer, being dependent on alcohol, feeling toxic and miserable. You can quit anytime you want. It's all a matter of perception and interpretation.
This is really resonating with me so much. It's a pattern that I did. I'd say I probably got into problem drinking maybe around 22. By 22, I was definitely seriously abusing alcohol. And then by 23, I was physiologically dependent. And for many years in my 20s, starting at 23, literally all the way throughout all my 20s and even into my early 30s, but specifically the years from around 22 to maybe 26 before I moved to upstate New York, I was unable to stay sober off of alcohol or anything else for that matter during the summer. I mean, Chris, you know where I live. And back then I was a half a block away from the ocean. I lived in South Ocean Beach, which is, probably about 3 miles from Pacific Beach, where you usually come to stay. So I was on this street called Bermuda Avenue, right on the corner of that and Sunset Cliffs Boulevard. Sunset Cliffs Boulevard's a really busy street that takes you all the way through Ocean Beach, and then it hugs the cliffs, the place called Sunset Cliffs, which is about a half-mile strip or longer, where on the left there's all these multi-million-dollar mansions and beach homes, vacation homes, or people who live there year-round, some of them. And on the right side, as you're driving south, is just the Pacific Ocean and running trails, dog walking trails. And, it's called Sunset Cliffs, rated one of the most beautiful places in all of California to watch a sunset. So I lived just before maybe 2 blocks just before, on the right side, it's the ocean. And a half block away from where I lived, you'd walk west, and it was like this kind of private beach that you take these steep stairs down to. So in the summertime, a lot of people go to the main beaches, right? Pacific Beach, Ocean Beach, Mission Beach. Well, I went there sometimes, but a lot of the times my friends and I would go to Bermuda Beach down those specific stairs, a much smaller beach than the public beach, no bathroom, but you could bring dogs down there. And it was gorgeous. There was like cliffs on top. There was these coves, and it was just paradise. It was the locals only beach because tourists didn't know about it. And I would just drink there. I would have so much fun drinking there with my buddies, playing bocce ball, playing frisbee, body surfing the shore break, going for swims. And then we'd just party at nighttime. There'd be parties, or we'd go to bars. So at that age, all throughout my 20s, with that beautiful weather, it was really hard, impossible for me to quit drinking in the summer. So every summer, I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it. So what I do is, okay, as soon as it comes to September 1st, I'm quitting drinking. And then that never happened, man. It'd come to September 1st, and I'd be like, okay, I'll just another week. Meanwhile, here comes October, here comes November, and I'm still drinking. Typically, I'd be able to quit drinking around November, because by then the weather started to get much colder, much darker out. But while the weather was nice, June, July, August, September, and October, those 5 months for me and my buddies were like drinking season. And so I know a lot of people nowadays are kind of doing the same thing, maybe not drinking at the beach, but they're drinking and they're telling themselves, or using drugs, and they're telling themselves, okay, as soon as I get this done, as soon as this event happens, or as soon as I get this certain project done with, or as soon as I'm finalized with the divorce, or as soon as I sell my, get through selling my house or paying off the mortgage, whatever it is, there are so many people kicking the can down the road, like you were saying, extending the goalpost and then extending it, and then never actually making that start date and keeping it. Making the start date, it takes a decision, a commitment, and a resolve. Then it takes a start date and a strategic plan, and hopefully accountability and support and other resources. Then when it comes time to that specific day and time to actually implement the plan, it's hard for people to do that. But when they start to do that, even if they fail when they go through the plan, then they can go back to the drawing board, write a report of, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, what did I learn? Now, how can I make the next start date and plan better using what I've learned from this? And then to just keep trying and keep trying. With that cycle, people will eventually do it. A lot of people are stuck for a long time, though, because they're not doing that kind of initial footwork of getting a calendar, putting the start date, really preparing for it so you work yourself up for the best chance of success, and then trying it. Maybe it doesn't work out, but I mean, as long as you keep doing that, it's just a matter of time before, all the stars are in alignment, the timing's good, for whatever reason, you can break through. But it's when people keep, like I said, kicking the can down the road, not making any concrete commitment and start day and plan, to where it's just easy to keep going. You just get stuck in that automatic habit of continuing to do the same shit. I've been stuck in that even many years after quitting drugs and alcohol, with like trying to change my diet or getting back to working out, or, watching less TV or something. So I get it. I know how hard it can be to get stuck in that kind of subconscious program autopilot that our brains are designed to make everything easier. That's why we don't have to think about it when we brush our teeth, when we get dressed. These are all kind of unconscious, outside of our awareness, easy to keep up habits, even if they're bad habits like drinking too much.
Yeah. Well, I think the anger that gets generated from procrastination can be utilized. It can be harnessed to force that change. And I have the same thing as you with me. I don't have sleep problems. I have lots of supplements that work for sleep. I have a problem of wanting to go to sleep. So I don't have a problem anymore if like I my head hits the pillow and it's 5 hours until I get to sleep. That almost never happens unless there's a serious problem that needs to be resolved, in which case I know being proactive which is the opposite of procrastination. Being proactive and at least doing everything I can to fix that is going to let me relax, reduce anxiety, and go to sleep. So, that's one of those things. I will occasionally just not want to go to bed until 2 a.m. because I have so much exciting stuff going on. I remember seeing, I think it was like a YouTube montage of who's the crocodile guy. He was unfortunately killed by a stingray. I'm blanking on his name, as I often do, but he was super pumped up in this video. He was like, I love nature. He's like, this is my life's purpose, is showing people about nature. And it is a tragedy that I have to go to bed at night. Like, he was like, I hate going to bed. I just want to do this all the time. So sometimes I feel like that, which is the exact opposite of when I used to use alcohol as a method of escapism, which would then keep me from going to bed, even if I had to get up early the next morning. That was a problem. But all of this is to say that you can use procrastination that you get from getting angry. And I occasionally will say, I'll wake up in the morning and go, why did I stay up doing X, Y, and Z, which were not horrible things to do, way better than drinking, obviously. But why did I stay up till 2 a.m? After 5 or 6 days of that, or a couple of weeks of it, maybe with some interspersed nights where I did make myself go to bed at 10, then I'll say, all right, tonight we're going to bed at 10. And you just make a choice. You have to remind yourself, you can actually choose to change your habits, even if they're in that realm of the subconscious autopilot. You don't have to keep doing what you're doing. It's the most natural path. It's the path of least resistance. It's the path you'll do by default if you don't make any changes, if you don't make a decision. But if you do make a decision, you can and you will change it. Now, you have to keep making that decision over time if you want it to be sustainable. And that's where a lot of people slip up. But I wanted to say a word about, you were saying people have conditional reasons for why they're going to tackle their addictions or quit drinking or quit drugs. And it seems to me those people have the problem and solution in reverse. They put the cart before the horse. Mm-hmm. So it's, if you say, I'm going to quit drinking when I get my dream job, I mean, why don't you quit drinking so that you can get your dream job? Or I'm going to quit drinking once my marriage gets better. That one is you almost always a sign of self-delusion, because 99% of the time when I have a client, and I always say I'm not a marriage counselor, but 99% of the time, if I have a client who has serious marital problems and they're a drinker, the alcohol is contributing to that situation. So quit drinking so that you can resolve the marriage problem, or figure out what the best option is. I mean, that's a complicated one, because often you have people who will sober up and then realize that they might have chosen the wrong partner or have other painful realizations. But a lot of the times, if they really want to work on it, they can decide to work on it and figure that out. I'll quit drinking once I stop being depressed. That's another one. The alcohol causes depression over time. Chronic alcohol exposure increases inflammation in the body, reduces your natural levels of feel-good neurotransmitters. You're not going to magically become undepressed as long as you keep drinking. But there is a very good chance that if you excise alcohol from your life or other drugs, and you start a program of nutrient repair, and you start living a better life, and you pay attention to the basics like fresh air and food and water and sunshine and earthing, then you'll be able to ameliorate your depression. Or you might realize that you're not inherently depressed. I spent years thinking that I had innate anxiety and depression and insomnia. Those were all symptoms of chronic alcohol exposure. Now, obviously, it's not random exposure. I chose to drink. I chose to start drinking, and I chose to keep it up. And at some point, that the neural pathways connecting alcohol with pleasure and relaxation and bliss and social norms and everything else became overwhelming. And so it was like, trying to walk up a mountain with a 500-pound boulder on my back to stop doing that. But as we know, there are ways to make that much easier. So all I had to do was make the decision that I wasn't going to do that anymore, and make a commitment to myself that I was going to figure out how to make it not feel like I was carrying a 500-pound boulder up a mountain, which ultimately I did. You tend to find what you're looking for. And that's one of my favorite Tony Robbins quotes. I think it applies to alcohol or addiction recovery. It applies to entrepreneurship. It applies to relationships. It doesn't mean that you always get what you deserve. I mean, obviously, either one of us could get hit by a Mack truck later today. We weren't looking for that. So obviously accidents happen, problems occur, but it does mean that you're more likely to figure out a solution for something if you decide to start looking for it.
Right. Yeah. I've heard Tony talk about that a lot in his audio programs, his books. And of course, my favorite is at his live seminars. And he'll often say, people will say, oh, it took me 3 years to make this change, like to leave a relationship or to start a new career. Oh, it took me all these years. He'll say, no, bullshit. It was one decision. It just took you 3 years to come to that moment to make that decision to do that. And decisions equal power. It's in the moment of decisions that your destiny is shaped. And you're just, everything you're saying, it's just bringing me back to kind of the days of drinking and drug using and addiction versus now. It reminded me of something that Zach brought up when I had a session with him, I guess Friday night that was. And he was saying how one of the goals for, recovery that he gives for his clients is intentionally and strategically visualize and come up with a plan to create a life without using alcohol, or, for people that want to moderate, but imagine a life that you would actually want to show up for and be present for. Oh, I'm paraphrasing, but it was so powerful. Back in the day when I was going through my alcoholism, at many very stressful points, and, doing lots of drugs as well, I would be so depressed, right? More than depressed, I'd just be so hopeless and fearful, very anxious, very scared, upcoming things that I was facing with people, with the law, based on bad decisions that I made, feeling guilt and shame, knowing that consequences were coming, just not wanting to deal with it, pounding alcohol, popping sleeping pills and benzos with the alcohol and painkillers, because I just wanted to just be numbed out. I didn't want to be present for a single second of my life at the life that I currently had, that I had created. And I wanted to be asleep a lot of the time. There was one phase where I had just broken up with a girlfriend. And even though it broke her heart, it broke my heart too. I'm really empathic like that. And even though I broke up with her, it was my decision. I went on a huge drinking bender afterwards. I had been off alcohol for 3 weeks. I broke up with her because, our relationship was just tied around alcohol and just drinking all day. And after I had 3 weeks off, I was like, what am I doing with this girl? This is just a drunken relationship. So I ended it, and she freaked out, said she was going to, just said all these crazy things that just made me feel horrible. So I felt so bad that I just went and got hammered. There was a beach party that day, a keg party down at Sunset Cliffs at this beach called No Surf. And on an empty stomach from about noon until sunset, I was drinking a keg of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Then we all go to some party out in East County, and I'm drinking Jack Daniels and Pepsi. All of a sudden, I black out and I wake up in the hallway of the hotel where the party was at. And I'm like in this hallway, who knows what time it is, 3 or 4 a.m. I start pounding on the door. No one's letting me in. Like, how did this happen? So I go walk out of there, find a bus stop. The bus isn't running. And I just sit there at the bus stop. There's a 7-Eleven close by. As soon as 7-Eleven opens, I go in there and buy a 40-ouncer of Mickey's malt liquor. And I buy a V8 and I make a poor man's Bloody Mary. And I brown bag it and I take it back to the bus stop and I start chugging it. The bus comes. I get on the bus, get all the way home back to Ocean Beach, get in my house finally. And I popped a bunch. I asked my roommate, can I have some of your sleeping pills? He's like, yeah, go ahead. I popped 2 or 3 of them, finished off the Mickeys. And then for the next probably week straight, Chris, every time I woke up, I would just take a few more sleeping pills and drink 5 or 6 beers. And then I would for about a week, I was sleeping about 22 hours a day. That's how depressed and like not wanting to deal with life I was. So, and that was around the age of 25, probably. So going from that, a life that not only I didn't want to be present for, but I didn't even want to be awake for. I wanted to just be asleep all the time because every time I woke up, It's like, oh, fuck this. Let me get back to sleep as soon as possible. Woo. To now be at a place where, like you, but not to the extent as you, because I love to go to sleep. But there are many nights where I don't want to go to bed. And because not only do I love to be present for this life, but I wish that, I could be like similar to a vampire, to where you don't need to sleep at all and you have tons and tons of energy. Of course, then you couldn't get sunlight and all those things. So I wouldn't want to be a vampire, really. But wouldn't it be cool if you didn't have to sleep at all? Or you could if you wanted to, but you didn't need to. That's a completely different life, to one where you don't want to even be awake, let alone be present, to one that you don't even want to go to sleep because you just want to keep being so present and just sucking all the juice and joy out of life and helping people and learning new things and being creative and having fun and being in love. Completely different lifestyles. One for me was drugs and alcohol, and this one is, Chinese herbs and, essential oil crystal candles and essential oil diffusers and exercise and natural sunlight and barefoot walking and, dozens and dozens of other things, most of which I wasn't doing back then.
Yeah. As you were telling that, and you're a great storyteller, by the way. I feel like I'm watching a movie or something when you're talking. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about my experience when I lived in New York, and I had several phases of drinking, relatively light, heavy, and then horribly heavy. I remember by the time I got to that extremely heavy phase, I would try to figure out how many sick days I could actually take. And I would do this subconsciously, but I would figure out when it was an okay time for me to take a sick day, and I would just check out. And I would wake up in the morning. Of course, I would convince myself I had the flu, because I had probably a cytokine storm from all of the alcohol that I'd consumed the night before. So my subconscious mind would lead me to drink an insane amount and stay up till 5 a.m. drinking. God knows, 25, 35 drinks, sometimes out, sometimes in my room. And I would literally incapacitate myself such that I could not go to work even if I wanted to. So I'd have to, quote, take my sick day. I'd call them, hello, yeah, I can't make it. I have the flu again. It's been 3 weeks, but I have it again. And that's out of the way. Throw the BlackBerry that I had at the time into the closet so no one could reach me. I would have a deli deliver an egg sandwich that they probably made with like shitty seed oils or whatever, and like an orange juice, just a ridiculous breakfast. And then I would open up a bottle of vodka that I would have well prepared. I was always well prepared with that. Have in my freezer, and just start drinking. Have mindless TV. Wait for that artificial buzz to reach a certain level. Look out my window. It's such a wonderful world. This is great. But it was all fake. It was fake, toxic, artificial bliss. And then as it started to go down, I hated the feeling of alcohol wearing off. I hated it. It was probably because I was such a hypoglycemic too. So my blood sugar was either up here and I felt amazing for 20 minutes that felt like 2 hours, and then it would start crashing down. So I could either drink more, or if I couldn't drink more, which there was a point at which I couldn't drink more, despite my enormous tolerance, I would then lay down and pass out for like 2 hours. And then I would get up and feel actually sick again and groggy. I would sometimes maybe have another drink so that I could at least walk around. It was very odd. But when I was in that state, a drink or 5 would like restore my vision. So I'd be going from extremely groggy to being able to see. My posture would get a little bit better, have a few drinks. That was my body's physical dependence on the alcohol for energy, which a lot of people can't understand. When you get to that point, that's what it's like. So then I would stroll around the city, and I lived pretty close to Times Square, but I'd walk down to Chelsea. I would look at the Equinox gyms with their beautiful giant glass windows and the modern plants and foliage, and people who were super fit, girls in pink sports bras and spandex, and guys, with looking jacked with their sleeveless shirts, sunglasses, eating something healthy outside. And I think, those people look like they figured something out that I haven't figured out. Isn't that weird? Walk by restaurants, people are hanging out, eating food. unfinished glasses of wine, I would think to myself, why aren't they finishing their wine? Like, fuck the food. I just want the wine. But they seem to take it or leave it. And that I'd always come back to my place, have a few more drinks, forget about that, and somehow not break that cycle. But hidden in that very depressing story, if illustrative, but still depressing, is that I actually had the power to change at any point. And I never made the decision to change. Now, a big part of that was that I didn't understand biochemically what was going on, what set me apart from other people, which, as I later learned, the distinction between so-called addicts or alcoholics and so-called normies, the distinctions are pretty slim, which is not to say that you can't become physically dependent on a drug, or including alcohol, and have your life be extremely impacted by it. But inherently, you might have some genetic predisposition for something, but predisposition is not destiny. You don't have to live like that. You can transcend it. You can move past it. You can make it a phase of your life. You don't need to struggle forever. And as we know, there are some people who spend a certain amount of time or a certain phase of their lives in severe addiction, and later on they become an occasional, sporadic, minimal user of various substances, including alcohol for some people. So I think it's important to remind people that you do have free will. Your subconscious mind runs the show by default, and it's actually useful to have your subconscious mind run things. I don't want to have to think too much when I go to the bathroom to take a pee, or when I walk my dogs. I have a very, a set routine. I need to be thinking about other things. The subconscious is useful. It's not always trying to sabotage you. But if you engage in things that are self-destructive to the point that the self-destructive activities become part of your subconscious autopilot, then it will seem as if you can't change. But you can rewire your subconscious brain. You can rebalance your biochemistry. You can restore the free will that you've had all along. Addiction is really the illusion that you don't have free will, which is not to say that it's not very hard. You and I have both been through it. We're the same people now that we were in those stories that we just told of our former selves. Well, I should say past phases of our lives, not really former selves. We've forged new and better identities, but we're still fundamentally the same people that we were. You were still Matt Finch, and so this is something that it was extremely hard for me to grasp as, when I reached that point, I transitioned from reading the depressing recovery memoirs to the self-help stuff and the Tony Robbins. I started realizing how our psychology worked. I read all sorts of books on neuroscience and nutrition and psychology. Started realizing, there's a body-brain system. There's a mind-body system. There's a subconscious mind. And then, of course, there's a rational mind, and there's free will. And all of these things can be healed together. And you can actually learn a lot from the depressing phases of your life. It doesn't have to be some kind of albatross that you carry with you forever.
Oh, man, that was all epic stuff. And it also reminds me of not just with alcohol, that phase that I was talking about where I didn't even want to be conscious. I wanted to be asleep. When it came to getting really addicted to opioids, I liked how they gave me energy and made me more creative and adaptable and euphoric. But there were various points when I was on opioids where, maybe I found out that my girlfriend cheated on me or something. This happened a few times. And things like that, and getting cheated on by a band member, someone that's supposed to be, one of my best friends that was in the band that I played in. And then all of a sudden, my girlfriend and a member of my band. That's like, you're looking out for potential dangers, but you're not really necessarily looking at you're the person that you live with, that you're in an intimate relationship, and someone you're in a band with. That's like the last people on your list that you think would backstab you, that you think would do something that could cause you so much harm. So in instances when those types of things happen, just really violated, and back then I was very, very sensitive, much more sensitive than I am nowadays. I'm still sensitive, but I've been through so much shit and gotten through it. And I'm 42 now. So, back then I was still kind of new to life and didn't have a lot of, adaptability and resilience and stoicism and spirituality and spiritual strength and will. So when those types of events happened, instead of just taking a regular amount of opioids to be able to have energy and get to work, I wanted to obliterate my consciousness. I would take a shitload. I'd go get heroin if I could, and Ativan, Xanax. And I wanted to take as much of a dosage of an opioid as I could, with as much of a dose as a benzodiazepine as I could, because I wanted to be able to lay back on the couch or go to the park. And I wanted to, it's called the nod. I wanted to be nodding, to where you're nodding in and out of consciousness. It's this feeling where it's like, it's so much like physical, emotional, mental, spiritual euphoria. It's like you're halfway in between the dream world and halfway in between reality. Your pain, all of your emotional pain is gone. And it's just like, okay, but you're like in and out of consciousness. And I remember this one guy that used to buy weed off me when I was probably 24. His name was Nick. And he would make fun of his friend. He'd bring his friend with him to buy weed for me sometimes. This is before I got addicted to pills. And his friend would be on a whole bunch of like Vicodin and Klonopin. And his friend would be kind of nodding out, that same nod I'm talking about. Me and the guy getting weed, Nick, we'd be smoking weed and laughing and getting all, giddy. And he'd just be on the couch, just kind of like nodding. And then what Nick would do is he would slap the guy's knee really hard. And he'd be like, oh, oh. And then we'd both start laughing. And then he'd start, a second or two later, he'd go back to that nod. And he's like, what an idiot, man. He's taken way too much. But looking back on that, and I was making fun of him too, never ever judge a person or the behaviors that they do until you've, walked a mile or in their shoes or lived in their shoes. Since he was doing that and wanting to nod out, my guess is he had a lot of trauma that he was either currently going through or expecting to come up. Most normal people that are really enjoying their life and, passionate about it, they don't intentionally do that to themselves, right? Nowadays, if someone came over and be like, hey, you want to take a bunch of pills and combine them so you're nodding out and you're like barely even conscious, I'd say absolutely not. That sounds horrible. So, but back then it was very desirable at many points, not wanting to deal with life, live with life. Another thing is the momentum. Then I'll let you take off here or anywhere you want. When you have so much negative momentum from the thoughts you've been thinking, the things that you've been doing, and the words that you've been saying, when there's so much negative momentum, you're overweight, unhealthy, drinking too much, using too much drugs or whatever, working a job you hate, for example, that's a lot of negative momentum built up to bring you to where you are. So of course, stopping all that negative momentum and then making some changes and then building a bunch of positive momentum, that's a process. There's inertia at work there. But once you get all that positive momentum, such as you and I have these days, dude, we're like freight trains. Any obstacles that come up, typically we're going so much fast and we have so much momentum that we just break through those walls. And so I want people to know that, that's one of the big things. It can be hard to change everything because of all the momentum that you have going in the opposite direction of where they want to go.
Right. I think as far as nodding off and achieving that, if you can call it achieving that state of bliss, half dream, half reality, totally, blissed out. That's something that I would achieve with alcohol sometimes. I wasn't quite nodding out, but it was like I was kind of floating. And, I was basically high on ethanol, and none of the negative stimuli that I could have paid attention to mattered or were coming in. Positive things I could think about, I'd be a combination of giddy and super relaxed. Didn't care if I was disoriented because it was fine. That state was preferable in a certain phase of my life. I know what it feels like, but I can objectively say that state is not preferable to the feeling that I have on a day-to-day basis nowadays. It was all I knew back then as far as bliss. But when we started talking today, I said I feel pretty blissed out because I went on a 3-mile walk with the dogs. I'm in good enough shape that it feels like I'm floating when I'm walking with the dogs. It's a nice day. I'm actually present with the trees and the nice breeze. I can appreciate the weather. It's kind of cooling off here, which means it's only 80 instead of 100. And, I've got the dogs, and I'm thinking thoughts of gratitude, and I'm focusing proactively on positive things rather than using a substance to biochemically and harshly and artificially and toxically make it easier for me to focus on those things. I don't need it. It's an exhausted resource. So I think people have this view of, say, heroin as, and I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they think of heroin as something that no one should ever try who's a quote normal person, because that one for some reason is so powerful, that drug, that it'll turn you into an addict, because the bliss you will experience will inevitably ruin your life. And I'm not sure that I believe that. My only positive experience ever with opiates, I had two experiences with opiates. One was Percocet, which I hated. I almost puked all over the floor and made me disoriented and nauseous. I decided to take it as prescribed and when I got my tonsils out and in college. It was kind of late to get them out, painful. But I wished immediately I hadn't taken that Percocet. I couldn't even stand up. The room was spinning around. I felt horrible. And then there was another time, I think actually related to that same tonsil issue that I had in college until I got them removed, where that's right. I had an emergency tonsil, I don't know what you call it, but they had to stick a scalpel in my throat and slice my tonsils to drain them because I couldn't breathe. And they had 4 doctors holding me down. I managed to throw like 2 of them against the wall. It was terrible. Yeah. So anyway, this was one big saga, which led me to my only experiences legally with opiates. At that point, they had a morphine drip, and I had this old bell or something where I could ring it to get more morphine. And I rang it like 5 times. And each time the nurse came and would give me more morphine. I know that morphine is molecularly similar to heroin. It's an opiate. I don't know how much stronger heroin is. I know there's fentanyl, never had that. But that was pleasant. I actually liked the morphine drip because it kind of put me in this, it felt like I was in some combination of a comedy and some heavenly bliss. Things were funny for some reason, and I was happy and I was joking around and just feeling really lighthearted. That was my experience with morphine. But and I apparently had a lot of it. The nurse kept coming back. It's amazing I didn't overdose. I mean, I don't know how many refills you're allowed to get, but I'm sure I maxed them out. And as far as I know, I didn't have any kind of opiate withdrawal after that. I was, during this time, that was the early phase of me developing a problem with alcohol. But I wouldn't say that state that I experienced on the morphine, which I remember pretty well, is something that would be preferable now to what I have on a daily basis here. It's not preferable to, and neither are the feelings that I got from drinking alcohol. It's not preferable to how I feel after a hard MMA workout, where I have camaraderie and highly skilled people who are taking the time to show me things, and I'm learning, and I get a great endorphin high. I mean, really, it's like, would I ever rather have something that's artificial and toxic instead of something that's natural and good for me and sustainable and won't make me feel like shit later? No, I wouldn't. So I think that's that part of the calculus for people who are recovering and or recovered, or for whom addiction is a past phase of life, is often overlooked by the status quo, which tends to think of addiction as this chronic, long-term, incurable, lifetime disease. And the assumption there, which is what I'm getting at, which I think is incorrect, is that you and I go through life longing for those amazing experiences, but ruminating on the negative consequences of them enough that we don't do it. But that's not true. We're actually obsessed with the positive consequences that are in fact better from newer things that we now do in this phase of our lives. And we don't want to detach from reality.
Just like the title of the last episode with Zach and I, we have outgrown alcoholism, and in my case, outgrown alcoholism and drug addiction. We simply outgrew those preferences and that lifestyle. It's all about growth. And in life, you grow the most when you're through suffering. That's why the ex-Navy SEAL David Goggins is so big on, you got to suffer, intentional suffering. And, he makes a lot of sense. When things are really comfortable in life, how much are you growing? You might be growing, but when you go through big, huge phases of suffering, even if it's self-induced, then you're able to heal from that, overcome that, transcend that, come out of that the other side. Always there's huge amounts of growth if we're willing to do that work to get it. And so eventually, yeah, you can either continue to go through life as a perpetual, addict or alcoholic, and you can always define yourself as that. 40 years later, hi, my name's Bob and I'm an alcoholic, or hi, my name's Janet, alcoholic, and my problem is me. If you want to continue to kind of reiterate that identity day in, day out, then that's fine. People can do that. But for people that have tried that and don't necessarily think it's best for them, or for people that have been told AA is the only way, 12 steps the only way, or total abstinence for life is the only way from everything, if that doesn't resonate with them, if they have a soul inner knowing that, wait a second, well, you and I are living proof, as well as so many other people, not just us. We didn't invent this. We're not unique in any way, because so many people in their own way have outgrown a phase of substance abuse, whether it was a year, 6 months, 5 years, 20 years. There's so much research on it nowadays that the vast majority of people that have ever had any type of problem drinking or problem drug use or even dependence do recover. And a lot of them do it by the time they're in their mid 30s or maybe 40 years old. So a lot of people, when they're in their 20s and 30s, will drink too much, have abuse, could be labeled by the labelers as having alcohol use disorder or substance use disorder. Most of those people don't seek any type of professional help, and most of them outgrow that phase of their life. And they don't bring in any of the terminology of recovery or anything like that. I personally know and am friends with, or even related with, so many people having gone through exactly what I've described. The first person I think I learned about it was one of my friends. I won't say anybody's names, but yeah, he quit heroin and he was drinking. He was a total alcoholic and he was shooting heroin. Then all of a sudden he quit heroin and he quit alcohol and he got really, really healthy. But then nowadays, some beers here and there, some weed here and there, maybe some ayahuasca here and there, never any type of traditional path at all. But that was a phase of his life. Had he gone to NA meetings and really loved it, and, then maybe he could go that route. But he just did what seemed intuitive to him. And I think there's a lot of room. There's a lot of room for people to get really creative and to really kind of harness your own intuition. And nowadays with this podcast and with all the other podcasts, books, YouTube channels, websites, blogs, there is so many different addiction recovery tools, so many ways to frame substance use, so many paths that you could take regarding abstinence or moderation, use these substances, not that. I hate people. Well, I don't hate people. I hate the idea of stigmatizing anybody that uses any types of drugs or specific types of drugs, because a lot of times drugs can really offer people, and even alcohol, altered states of consciousness, which, when either used responsibly or medicinally, can be a net highly valuable resource for their life. It's only when the negative consequences start to greatly outweigh the positive benefits that resource has become exhausted. And then, they've kind of abused that resource, and now it's depleted and move on. But when things are still a resource, I think the more resources a person has in their life that can add value to it, the better, even if they're shunned upon by mainstream society.
Right. Yeah. I think, the subject of moderation with alcohol comes up a lot. And that's a term that it doesn't make a huge amount of sense, because it's either the average of all people who drink, in which case the average is being pulled up by the minority of people who drink most of the alcohol that the alcohol companies rely on their sales forecasts for. Or I guess if you include the abstinent people in that average, then maybe they cancel each other out. I'm not sure. Or it means safe. So we have studies that say no level of alcohol is safe, which is not the same thing as saying you should never do it. I mean, I don't know if there's a level of motorcycle riding or jet skiing or kite surfing that's safe. I don't have a desire to ride a motorcycle, mostly because I do know of too many people who have had accidents, but I don't judge anyone who does. And I love jet skis, and I love, well, hopefully soon we'll love kite surfing. I'm still in the lesson phase of that. So I do risky things that could be bad. I'm not one to judge, but it seems to me that, when people say, oh, I drink moderately, or, they ask often, hey, I have X number of drinks per week, is that moderate? I have no idea how to answer that question, but I also don't want to be confused as the person who is a prohibitionist, because I don't want to be telling people what to do. I don't have a moralistic tone, I hope, as far as drinking goes. I think of it as suboptimal. I think of it as kind of gross. I know that I have friends who are personal trainers who have never had a problem with alcohol, who tell me, when I go out to dinner with my girlfriend, I have 2 beers and then I feel like shit the next morning. So I just don't drink. Maybe once in a blue moon, I forget that I feel like shit. So I have 2 beers again. Then I remember, oh, I feel like shit. So these are highly tuned machines, these types of people. And I know a lot of them. My MMA training partner doesn't drink. He's a competitive fighter. He obviously has never had a problem with alcohol, but for the same reason, because it is a toxifying substance. That's a much different thing than saying that you should never consume it. People have their own reasons for doing all sorts of things. So rather than have like a moralizing knee-jerk tone, someone had a drink, oh my God, they relapse back to square one, starting over, counting days. I'm not even moralizing about those things. You want to count days? That's fine. A lot of people in my course count days. I counted days for a while till I lost count. And then I don't really need to expend energy, figure out how many days or weeks or whatever it's been, but it's a personal choice. But I often say to my clients that, my goal is not necessarily for alcohol to never touch your lips again. That might be a really good outcome, but my goal is to help you build a life that's so fulfilling and healthy and happy that alcohol becomes a moot substance. And whether or not that means that alcohol is a moot substance that you almost never use or that you never use, that's totally your call. I don't see how something can be a moot substance if it's part of your daily routine. And so that's another reason that I'm not moralizing. It just doesn't make sense. If you have 2 glasses of wine every single day for the rest of your life, it seems like a kind of an odd thing to do. I wouldn't do it. But again, I know people who do that. My grandfather actually had his scotch every day at 5 p.m. and he would flip out if he didn't have it, even when he was like, in his mid to late 80s. And I don't know whether or not he had an issue with alcohol. It doesn't matter because I don't need to moralize about that. I think sometimes maybe he drank more than he should have from a health perspective, but he lived pretty long. But my goal is to help people maximize their overall level of well-being and health. I don't think that you can use words like sobriety as a proxy for someone's happiness. And obviously there are extremes where someone can say, well, the level of alcohol that makes me happy or the level of heroin that makes me happy is some gargantuan amount. I need 45 drinks a day to be happy. I think I read somewhere, I don't know if this is true, but that Kim Jong-un in North Korea has like 13 bottles of wine a night. I'm thinking, wow, he outdid me. I don't even know how that's possible. So the question then is, well, is it possible that you need to be an alcoholic to be happy? If that's the case, you probably have some biochemical disorder symptoms that need to be addressed if you want to be as happy as you can possibly be. But on the other side, I know personally too many clients who have sought help and were drinking way too much, had a long period of rejuvenating their biochemistry, rebalancing their brain-body system, reconditioning their minds, and they decide at some point that for whatever reason, they're going to have a glass of wine. And oftentimes they say that it doesn't produce the same pleasure as before. And so that was like a worthy experiment in their case. Now, for someone else who's not ready, or for someone who's been off of alcohol for a week and a half, who's thinking that what I'm saying is encouraging, which by the way, I'm not encouraging, and I will never encourage anyone to drink, nor will I promote alcohol. But if you're thinking, oh, maybe I'm ready to experiment, probably not after a week and a half. It's probably not the case. If you've had severe neurotransmitter imbalances or health issues from alcohol that might be invisible, such as inflammation, or for whatever reason you have not experienced your body's full potential and your brain's full potential to bring you natural euphoria and pleasure, then it's probably not a great time to go see if alcohol helps you, because it may provide that illusion for now. All of this is to say that everyone's individual and unique, and there's no one size fits all. And I think that is objectively true from a health and mental health optimization perspective. The question of whether it's best to give people the full, unfiltered, nuanced truth, or whether it's best to give them black and white cliches, is another issue. But I think that most people in our audience are smart enough to figure that out. Otherwise, they wouldn't have found us.
I'll just end with this, as I really believe, in lots of different spiritual stuff. And I feel like you and I came together and found each other. What was that? 4.5 years ago, maybe even longer ago now. I really think that this was destined or orchestrated or somehow manifested to be able to provide the masses with types of addiction recovery, alcohol and drug recovery strategies, ideas, concepts, solutions, tactics, resources that are not black and white, that are very nuanced, that are very holistic, because the paradigm needed to be blown up. The paradigm of, just the one path recovery doctrine, the kind of mainstream recovery backdrop, cultural backdrop matrix. I really feel like that's what we're here to do. And what a great, meaningful, and purposeful life. Because there's so many other people that are a lot like us in their goals of, I don't want to label myself as this. I don't want to go to these meetings. I don't want to be on that medication forever. I don't want to do this. There has to be another. So now it's fun for this podcast and the other things that we do to introduce people to things like, this book that you turned me on to, Evolutionary Herbalism, Science, Spirituality, and Medicine from the Heart of Nature. And this stuff is not talked about in the mainstream stuff. Someone commented on one of my YouTube videos yesterday, and she said that she asked her doctor what types of vitamins and diet and exercise stuff could help her to rebuild her brain coming off Suboxone, which is a long-acting opioid medication. Her doctor said none. There's nothing that's going to help. Only tapering off Suboxone and then waiting through time. And she said it made her furious because she said that she listened to both you and I on this podcast regularly, and she watches the YouTube videos and stuff. And so, it's fun. It's fun to give, another side of the story. There's one story, which is black and white, one paradigm, one narrative. And it's fun that, we're teaching people not only what we do, but also here's how to customize it. Here's how to create your own narrative. Here's how to follow a path or create a path or forge a completely new one. And here's how to do it as safely as possible, as comfortably as possible. Here's how to grow as much as possible. Here's kind of the nuts and bolts of things, ideas, and then giving people the power to be, and also the responsibility of taking control of their own life versus a lot of people that have been so programmed by mainstream media, by the kind of cultural norms, without ever really stepping outside of it and listening to other ideas and critical thinking. So, you and I do this stuff naturally, but other people, that's not their strong suit. But then it's fun to kind of wake people up because so many people have found us and been like, oh, this is making so much sense. I was totally programmed by this fear-based model of addiction recovery. It's so liberating and freeing and fulfilling and gratifying. Freedom's the biggest word. They feel so much more free. And then all of a sudden, this path of overcoming their addiction or healing from it, now they're excited about it because it's completely more creative, it's more freeing, and it's more customized and unique based on that they're a sovereign being, like you were just saying. It's not one size fits all recovery, not one size fits all medical treatment for various things that people are afraid of right now. One size fits all is a scam, it's a fraud, and anyone that says otherwise is a scam and a fraud.
Well, in that doctor's defense, I don't think there's a randomized placebo control study showing that you need to breathe air in order to survive. So I don't know what recommendations he could have given.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, do you got anything else to say, Chris? I think I'm out of
We'll save it for next time.
All right. And Papaya, you got anything to say? She's like, put me back on your shoulder. Right on. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for checking out this episode. We love you guys, and we'll see you next time.